Great. So again, the official welcome to the beginning of the webinar. I'm Jason Jones, Managing Principal and Service Line Leader of Cresa's Hybrid Workforce Services. I'm joined today by Steve Ike and Paul Springer, both Senior Vice Presidents at Cresa. Officially, welcome to the webinar. There's a workforce trend happening right now that's both frightening and exciting. Frightening because this trend causes real disruption in any organization, but exciting because of its implications for the health of the broader economy and because of the possibilities for organizations who really go on the offensive to capitalize on this trend. So I'm going to let the headlines do the talking. That frightening and exciting trend is, as this headline from a recent Forbes article describes, workers are quitting their jobs in record numbers as the U.S. experiences a booming job market. More headlines. In the Wall Street Journal, forget going back to the office. People are just quitting instead. Bloomberg Wealth, employees are quitting instead of giving up working from home. Again from Forbes, companies who focus on their workers will win the war for talent when offices reopen. And finally, from the New York Times, how do they say economic recovery? I quit. Quoting from the article, with new opportunities and a different perspective as the pandemic eases, workers are choosing to leave their jobs in record numbers. And here's the proof. A chart from the US Labor Department. This shows the number of US workers leaving their jobs as a percentage of total employment, and it's called the quits rate. And quits are voluntary separations initiated by the employee. It's a good barometer of a worker's willingness to leave their job, and by association, their confidence in their ability to get another job. A few key numbers for context. The low point on this graph is September 2009, just coming out of the Great Recession. Now, it makes sense that at that time, hardly anyone was voluntarily leaving their job, and the quits rate was 1.2%. Then, over time, the economy began to improve, and the number of people leaving their jobs voluntarily, quitting, increased. But then the pandemic hit, and the quits rate plummeted to 1.5% in April of 2020. However, coming out of the pandemic 1 year later, in April of 2021, the quits rate skyrocketed to a whopping 80% to 2.8%, the highest level since at least 2000. Now in May, which is the month, the most recent month that we have information for in statistics, it decreased to 2.5%, but still well above the 20-year history. So what can be done about all of this quitting? What are organizations doing to recruit and retain talent in the midst of this war for talent? Well, some are offering raises and bonuses, and some are extending perks, such as offering free Pelotons and Apple products. Others are taking the time to redesign an engaging office environment. Google is a good example. They're rebuilding and repurposing their office space to make them inviting, using ideas like team pods and outdoor teepees, which are cool areas to hang out and have group meetings. They're really trying to make the office a place where their employees want to go and candidly are willing to do the commute. And finally, many forward-thinking companies are planning flexible, hybrid workforce strategies that leverage both what they've learned about remote work over the past year and a half and combine that with the time-proven benefits of a shared office. Ford Motor Company is a great example. Ford has announced a progressive hybrid work model for 30,000 of its office-based employees who can, quote, continue to work from home indefinitely and have flexible hours approved by their managers. And this progressive idea, that's coming from a 100-year-old manufacturer in the staid auto industry. I think this quote by Kirsten Robinson of Ford is both insightful and humble. She says, if there's one thing we've learned over the last 12 months, it's that a lot of our assumptions around work and what employees need has shifted. So The question most organizations are now asking is, if a hybrid strategy can help recruit and retain the best and the brightest, then what should be the balance for my organization between remote and office? In other words, what's the right hybrid blend? And when asking this question, it's important to remember that the new reality is, according to multiple surveys, at least 70% of all office-based workers want a part-time combination of working from home and the office. And the remaining 30% are basically split evenly between full-time remote and wanting to be in the office full-time. So what is the right blend for your organization? What are the criteria for a successful hybrid strategy that ensures you're not missing anything? Is there a roadmap that can tie together all of the distinctive criteria of each department of your organization? And finally, how do you operationalize your strategy and really put it into action with confidence? To answer these questions, you need a plan to affirm and operationalize your strategy. But every plan is going to be unique to every organization and likely unique to each department within an organization. And the problem is, right now, many leaders feel just like the person on the screen. There are so many paths forward, so many variables to consider. Many leaders feel stuck, and it's hard to build consensus on a way forward. So if you are interested in a methodical way to both affirm and then operationalize your workforce strategy that ensures you don't miss any of the critical requirements specific to each department of your organization, then this is the webinar for you. As I mentioned, I'm Jason Jones. I'm joined today by Steve Ike and Paul Springer, both Senior Vice Presidents at Cresa. I've been at Cresa for 18 years, originally as a real estate advisor, but now exclusively leading 2 of our service lines, Cresa Business Technology Sourcing and Hybrid Workforce Services. Steve Ike has over 25 years of experience providing workforce strategy to expertise to companies like General Electric, Macy's, Procter & Gamble, and Kimberly-Clark, just to name a few. Paul also has 25 years of experience working with nonprofit and for-profit organizations, integrating human resources, operations, IT, and real estate. Today we'll have a 50-minute presentation with some Q&A at the end. We'll record the webinar and send a copy out afterwards. Please ask questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen at any time throughout the presentation. Don't wait till the end for the Q&A period. And even if you have just an idea, a comment about something that you're hearing or something you'd like to offer, please share it with the group because we all benefit from that. And we'll get to everything at the end of the webinar. So today we're going to address, number 1, context for where we are in the timeline of the COVID-19 experience from a work perspective, the benefits and challenges of hybrid workforce strategies, its key elements, and a roadmap to build a sustainable strategy. So we start with context for where we are in the timeline of the pandemic. Phase 1 was the immediate phase. People were forced to vacate their offices and work from home. Phase 2 is the endure phase, and we have been enduring, leveraging technology, modifying workflows, and working to maintain our culture. Phase 3 will be the sustain and compete phase. This is the post-COVID phase. Organizations will work to sustain new ways of working that leverage what they learned about remote work, but also recapturing all of the benefits of a shared central office. But to get from phase 2 to phase 3, we have to go through a transition. And that's where we are right now. Or should I say, that's where we should be right now. Forward-thinking leaders are there, taking advantage of this time to invest and prepare for the future. But before leaders can move forward with a specific transition plan, they've got to ask a key question. This is a question that addresses the key workforce desire to continue working from home part-time, sort of that freedom of choosing where they work. And this is a question that we suggest you too ask yourself. And the question is, what is the right hybrid workforce strategy specific to us that will be reflective of our culture, and minimize expenses and the threat to business continuity, while at the same time maximize productivity, talent attraction and retention, and financial results. So it's these key business drivers that inform our planning process for a hybrid strategy. And in order to evaluate different strategies, we start by understanding the benefits and the challenges. So let's take a look. The benefits of a hybrid workforce strategy combine the best of remote work and the best of the shared office. At the top of the list for remote working is reduced commute and fewer interruptions. These, of course, increase productivity. Other potential benefits are the reduced expenses of real estate, employee turnover, absenteeism, and the personal costs of reduced commute, clothes, and food. There are environmental benefits, and employees consistently state that their work-life balance is better. Now, on the other hand, the benefits of the office are time-proven, and they've really crystallized during the pandemic. Highlights on the screen include things that typically occur best in person, such as mentoring and serendipitous moments. One benefit of both remote work and the shared office is the ability to recruit and retain talent. With at least 70% of employees wanting a hybrid workforce experience, organizations will have to offer some degree of flexibility between working from home and the office in order to recruit and retain the best and the brightest. However, even with all the benefits of a hybrid workforce, there are several challenges to plan for. And we're going to highlight 3 scenarios that organizations could be faced with in a post-COVID hybrid workforce environment. And the first challenge is the potential for disparity between teams. Let's take Team A. Team A is a manager who embraces a hybrid workforce. She's on board with the concept of giving you freedom to choose where and when you feel you can be the most productive. Periodically, she requires in-person meetings, but they're purposeful and well-run. She focuses on the output of your efforts, not the input of your time. Team members feel a strong spirit of freedom working for her. Then there's Team B. Team B has a manager who doubts the long-term effectiveness of a hybrid workforce. He's uncomfortable managing people he can't see and requires in-office presence, although he does allow working outside of the office 1 day of the week. When Team B looks at Team A, they feel constrained. So what's the outcome? Team B feels jealous and dispirited, and they wonder, can I switch teams? Or worse, should I leave my job? Another potential challenge is the internal division within a hybrid team. And in this scenario, we have in-office team members who are either full-time in the office or majority in office, and then we have remote team members who are either full-time remote or majority remote. Now, if the boss spends most of her time in the office, then in-office team members have proximity to her that remote members do not. This proximity may lead to real or perceived better career opportunities, choice assignments, promotions, etc., and better access to information. What's the upshot of this scenario? Remote team members feel undervalued and dispirited. Teamwork is reduced, and they wonder, can I switch teams? Or worse, should I leave this organization? And yet another challenge, our final challenge of a hybrid workforce, regards how to accommodate multiple employee profiles. And by profiles, we mean how and when an employee chooses to work. For example, profile number 1 are employees who choose to work 3 days in the office and 2 days at home, or perhaps the other way around. Profile number 2 are in the office 100% of the time, but there's a cultural acceptance that if they take an afternoon or a day to work remotely, no big deal. And profile number 3's default location is at home, but they attend periodic in-person meetings and occasionally choose to drop in the office or to work or just to socialize. The challenge is, how do you accommodate all of these profiles? What are the critical requirements of each department in your organization to support them? Now, this next slide is really key to awareness of what it takes to support a hybrid workforce. What should organizations do from the perspective of human resource policy, measuring performance, ongoing training, cultural norms, technology, cybersecurity, and developing a real estate strategy that will support each of these profiles? At the same time, should you even allow all of these profiles? Is it any surprise while many leaders are feeling stuck and finding it difficult to build consensus about a way forward? So we thought it would be interesting to hear what your most pressing challenges are, or what you think they will be with a hybrid strategy. So I'm going to launch a poll and read the screen as you fill this out. It's just 3 questions. But what we're interested in is, what are the most pressing challenges for your organization? And this is multiple choice. Pick the top 3. And they could be anything from communication and change management, fairness for evaluations and promotions, morale and culture of the organization, human resource policies, redesigning office space, cybersecurity, collaboration, mentoring, etc. And even if you are, sometimes we have advisors on the webinar as well. Vote what you feel your clients are facing or what you have heard them mention, if you don't mind. Second question is, has your organization determined its future workforce strategy? And that's a range from nope, not any decisions yet, or have not started official planning, or, well, we've not made any decisions, but we have started planning. And then third, yes, we've decided and need to create or implement our plan. And finally, what kind of workforce strategy will your organization employ? And there's a range there, of course, anywhere from office first to fully remote and somewhere in between. And don't forget the last one, which is the no one size fits all strategy. It will depend on job roles, leaders, and employee preference, et cetera. So, all right. I think we've got most of the votes in. Just waiting to see if there's any more. All right, well, it's a small pool, but we're going to go forward and end the polling, and then I will share the results. And what's interesting is here is we've got 100% with fairness for evaluations and promotions, very good one, collaboration and mentoring as the top challenges. And no, we have not made any decisions, but have started planning. And then finally, it's an office first strategy with some remote days is the key. And it looks like we've got everybody voting the same. So I'll stop sharing results. And what we are seeing is, and that makes sense, that fits in what we're seeing around a higher percentage of organizations having developed a strategy, but not all organizations. And many still face some degree of uncertainty over how well their plan is going to work, both in the near term, but also the long term. So in response, we've developed conceptual frameworks and practical roadmaps to tie all of the components of hybrid working together into a cohesive strategy that you can then operationalize with a sustainable plan. And the first key framework is a concept we call be sequential to be successful. This is the best place to start and get your feet on the right path without getting ahead of yourself. And it all starts at the top. We believe that the 2 most important elements of success are leadership and culture. That's the umbrella which overhangs all success. Then, the fundamental business goals of operational productivity, recruiting and retaining talent, and maximizing financial results both informs decisions and drives behavior. To support these business goals, you've got to follow a sequential path, though, that starts with a workforce strategy, the subject of today, followed by a workplace strategy and design, and then a real estate strategy. And too often, companies skip the human component of the workforce strategy and they go straight to step 2 or step 3. So here it is again. Step 1 drives step 2, which leads naturally to step 3. be sequential to be successful. So with this in mind, we're going to focus on the 5 steps to affirm and operationalize your workforce strategy. In the process, it's best thought about in 2 phases. Phase 1 is to determine or affirm what the strategy is, and phase 2 is to operationalize that strategy. Step 1, determine and affirm, is easy to say, but harder to do. And even those of you who may have already determined your strategy might feel compelled to reassess key building blocks of the strategy in light of what you learned today. At a high level, you'll need to decide whether the strategy is fully remote, fully office, or a hybrid blend of the two to some degree. But it's also a decision around, this is really important, whether this is an organization-wide mandate or will the choice of the strategy be at the discretion of departmental and team leaders? Who's making the decision? Now, once you've made these decisions, you can move on to phase 2 and steps 2 through 5 and operationalize the strategy. But the first step is actually quite complex. So we're going to walk you through a roadmap for making this decision and affirming your strategy in a thoughtful, methodical manner that contemplates and aligns all of the key components of your organization. So in order to effectively implement a sustainable hybrid strategy, you've got to ensure that the entire organizational structure is both prepared to support its success and aligned. And by organizational structure, we're referring to the critical requirements for a successful plan that are specific to each department. You can see the departments listed on the screen. You'll need to ask, are all of our departments aligned and prepared? What gaps might there be in their ability to support the strategy long term? And by the way, this is what top talent is looking for when they consider joining an organization or contemplate whether they should stay in an organization. They want to know, number 1, what is your strategy and its guidelines? And number 2, they want assurance that the organizational structure is in place to support the strategy and their success. So this slide shows all of the details of the critical requirements by department. This is the checklist that every organization should work through when deciding on and affirming their hybrid workforce strategy. At Cresa, we help organizations evaluate all of these requirements in a thoughtful, methodical manner, and we believe this is a key differentiator for our firm. We don't know of anyone else who starts their real estate strategy by evaluating the critical requirements of an upstream workforce strategy. So we're going to send an email out to everyone who's attending with this list. So no need to jot down every point right now because it can be overwhelming. But we are going to go through a few of these departments in some detail during the webinar. But if you would like to have a deeper conversation about your specific situation, please contact us, myself, or Paul, or Steve, and our email addresses will be up at the end, or the Cresa advisor who invited you to the webinar. We enjoy those open dialogues and sharing what we're seeing other organizations doing. So to go into a little bit more detail of the human resource critical requirements, I want to introduce my colleague, Paul Springer. Paul is our human resource and operations subject matter expert. And again, he's got over 25 years of experience. And Paul, I turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Jason. One of the most critical departments to a successful hybrid workforce strategy is the human resource department. The critical requirements for HR to effectively support this type of hybrid work strategy starts with job roles. Interestingly, although many organizations went to 100% remote during the pandemic, that doesn't mean that all roles moving forward are suitable for a full-time work from home strategy. Many roles, as we know now, can be done remote, but the better question is, should they be done remote? In order to achieve the highest productivity, you need to determine if a role has dependencies or requires in-person collaboration in the office, or if there's other resources that they need to take advantage of. Additionally, even if roles are suitable for remote work, the job processes need to be clearly align with the hybrid workforce strategy. This could mean automation of paper-based processes, digitizing of files, reviewing systems, and understanding the best way to collaborate. This leads to training for managers and employees. Managers may benefit from training to better manage a dispersed team that includes both people at home and in the office at any given time. In addition, the technology that enables remote work is constantly changing, and many employees don't even know the full suite of technology that their organization has made available to them. Another key component to this strategy is ensuring transparent and equitable criteria and eligibility guidelines. These should be memorialized and communicated clearly to increase transparency within the organization. Lastly, a key component of the strategy is the employee handbook. Many businesses only focus on the hybrid or remote work policies and procedures. However, with a dispersed team, the entire employee handbook requires a detailed review and update to ensure the policies are written to align with both a remote and in-office audience. In addition, we recommend the use of an intranet or other automated communication platform to enable employees to easily access and clearly understand the employee handbook no matter where their work location. As mentioned, a key part of the handbook is the written hybrid workforce policy. These policies should include items like eligibility requirements, tools and resources the company will provide for home use, what the employee is expected to provide as far as having a professional and clean work location, a place where they can work that's quiet, and appropriate internet standards in order for them to meet the needs of their role. In addition, expectations for personal performance and participation, and then what constitutes disqualification. A clear policy is crucial to setting expectation, and as a leader, if you don't set expectations, your employees will set their own, and they will likely be different from yours. For a deeper dive into technology, I want to introduce my colleague, Steve Ike. As mentioned previously, Steve Ike has 25 years of experience providing workforce strategy consulting to several large, successful global businesses. Steve, I hand it over to you.
As I go to the bottom of my screen to click the unmute button, Paul, thank you so much for that and sharing. And as we look at technology, I want to bring up the premise that really technology is more than platforms and tools. It's a resource and an enabler that can be leveraged to create that collaborative and connected enterprise. As we look at how, when, and where people work, whether it's remote, in the office, or a combination, communications and collaboration platforms are the foundation for that purposeful interaction. Through real-time communications, the platforms can be used for anytime, anywhere, one number reach across multiple devices. And when combined with a shared workspace to meet, collaborate, and share ideas, we become that much more connected, that much more collaborative, and most of all, that much more productive, no matter where we're working. And performance management focuses on something that is very important in a hybrid workforce strategy. We want to manage productivity rather than activity, and takes into account and addresses building trust, empowering employees, and driving productivity. And it addresses that if I can't see, I can't manage mentality to, hey, if I can measure, I can manage. So performance management is both a process and a set of tools that organizations use to measure and evaluate corporate and employee performance. And downstream, this helps managers and employees have meaningful conversations and provides real-time access into that information and a real-time dashboard and a visual dashboard. And it helps address those issues that Jason mentioned earlier of that tension between in-office and remote, but also provides the foundation for providing consistent and measurable indications of productivity, progress towards goals, and really driving business outcomes. And in the third point, document management, it's an online storage and a library, but when combined with management tools and management interfaces, it can be utilized to manage content, address the security of that document, who's the owner of the document, what version are we on, and how we distribute those documents and files throughout the organization. So think of 3 areas where real-time and anytime access to process workflows and document control. That could be a loan process for a financial services industry, claims management processes in an insurance organization, or even client matter and case files in law firms. We all deal with electronic information, and the key is to have a document management system that allows us to access that across the organization. And the 4th point, in cybersecurity and compliance, to me, it's the most often overlooked and underanalyzed area for remote work. With more people at home, connected on more devices, provides the opportunity for unauthorized people to gather and gain access to critical and secure information. And there are technical considerations for us to think about, like the wireless networks in our house, and separating that from the common wireless and common network connectivity, to the secure connectivity between my mobile phone, my tablet, or my laptop back to the corporate office, where I take a look at not only securing the connection, but preventing intrusion detection. But it also takes into account the human factor, where there are human errors and threats from within. These can be intentional or accidental, and most often they are accidental. And finally, in the security environment, really looking at the physical aspect. Some are able to have a locked door where they work, but others work in a common area. We want to make sure that we've got a secure laptop. And we take into consideration those that are working around us when we're in a multi-homeowner and resident environment, where we have multiple people working in common spaces or common areas. We want to address the no eyes to hear and, no ears to hear and eyes to see what we're working on. But I think the most valid point through all of this is keeping our work activities from our personal activities, and really assessing, planning, training, and then developing part of our remote work policy should have a cybersecurity and compliance policy that addresses protecting that information. And really, that assessment will give you that pathway towards that. So Jason, as I hand off to you, thank you for the few moments to share how information technology can be a tool for providing for an optimal remote work experience.
Thank you very much, Steve. Yeah, no, that's very good. The concept that a human resources policy should, and hybrid workforce policy needs to include a cybersecurity policy as well. So we appreciate that. So another key component of a workforce plan, again, another department to be considered, is real estate, the physical space that employees occupy. And that concept of office space has really changed over the past 12 to 18 months. To accommodate employees' desire for freedom of choice in where and when they work, organizations really need to view the workplace as a network of flexible, convenient, and on-demand places, because employees want the option to choose a workplace location where they feel that they're going to be most productive that day or even just part of the day, which means freedom of movement is very important, and facilitating that freedom of movement, whether it's between workplaces geographically or even inside of a workplace, inside of the office. At the same time, in order to really make this effective, leaders must be purposeful about their frequency and the medium they choose for collaboration. Team leaders need to be intentional about when they use the medium of the office space, the physical space, versus when to use the medium of digital tools for meetings and collaboration. People are more sensitive to investing the time it takes to drive to go meet in person now. You don't want them wondering, why did I make the commute and come all the way into the office for this meeting? Leaders will need to model the behavior of being organized and prepared and thoughtful about how to make the best use of everyone's time and build a culture of purposeful collaboration. So to make it easier to visualize these 5 steps, and remember, we've only just talked about one, the first one so far, but the 5 steps to affirm and operationalize your strategy, we developed a roadmap to guide you through both phases of that process. This is the core of our workforce strategy consulting, and we divide it into a workshop and a blueprint plan. And the workshop starts with phase 1, which is step 1, to affirm the strategy. As a reminder, this is to clearly state whether your organization is fully office, fully remote, or some degree of a hybrid blend. And as importantly, it's to state whether or not this is a one-size-fits-all, organization-wide mandate, or to what degree will it be up to departmental and team leaders to decide. We always begin this process with a vision and goals session. And this is where you build your project team, establish goals, and set a timeline. Next, you go through a discovery process, conducting interviews, surveys, and focus sessions to gather information about the critical requirements that we went through earlier. Then you'll analyze by identifying gaps that you find in the critical requirements, the preparedness, and to determine solutions. This phase ends with an internal affirmation of your chosen strategy. Now, phase 2 is the subject of the rest of the webinar. It encompasses steps 2 through 5 to operationalize the strategy that you've chosen. And we call this portion of our consulting the blueprint plan. So let's talk about criteria and guidelines. Step 2 is where you will determine the criteria and guidelines for implementation. By this, we mean the specifics around when people will be working in the office versus remote. And examples would include X number of days of the week in the office, or another way to do this is X% of the time in the office, which provides a little more flexibility. So that could be this week it's 2 days next in the office, next week it's 3 days, and you balance it out. Or this month it's 1 week in the office, and next month it's 3 weeks in the office to average out to 2 per month. And there may be variations for specific employees based on their job or their travel requirements, as opposed to a blanket policy. Now, we also recommend that you consider categorizing each employee to help communicate the plan throughout your workforce with both transparency and equity, 2 key words as you move forward in this new workforce strategy. Next, you'll need to memorialize the plan. And this not only means putting the plan in writing, of course, but also documenting specific human resource policies, updating job descriptions and contracts, and of course, creating dynamic schedules that detail where and when employees are scheduled to work. After clear documentation, crossing the T's and dotting the I's, you'll need to prepare a very clear communication and change management plan. Here, it's critical that you anticipate the effect of your strategy on culture and operations of the organization. Preparing a 12-month communication playbook will put you in position to manage the change smoothly. Things to include in the playbook are a roadmap of key milestones, a plan for which communication vehicles that you'll utilize, such as Slack, newsletters, town halls, etc., and a mini library of pre-planned internal messaging. This will help you avoid being caught flat-footed in the coming months. And then finally, with any major change, such as a new workforce strategy, you should assess, recalibrate, and ultimately evolve over time. We recommend you review your strategy every 3 months after the initial rollout in order to ensure continuous improvement and that the strategy continues to be aligned with the organization's mission. Allow your organization to experiment with new ideas, solicit feedback along the way, and then take the initiative to make changes to ensure that you're achieving those fundamental business goals of operational productivity, recruiting and retaining talent, and achieving the best financial results. So with that, let me offer a summary. And the first item to summarize is, it's clear that the desire for freedom is changing where and when we work. This freedom to choose that employees have enjoyed and want to continue enjoying. And as important as a shared central office is, this desire for freedom of choice requires that most organizations develop a hybrid workforce strategy unique to them, unique to their culture, and their business needs. Second, to get there, transition is key. How you make this transition to your new hybrid work environment will determine how competitive you will be. Competitive to attract and retain talent, and also to compete with other organizations in the marketplace. And then finally, be sequential to be successful. And this is really important. Don't skip steps. Before you operationalize a strategy, be sure that your organizational structure can support it. Build your plan on solid information gathered from all the departments of your organization to ensure alignment and preparedness. Then follow through on all of the steps of implementation. That way, you'll be in a better position to evaluate ongoing feedback as you get it and make continuous improvements. Now, there's one last thought that we want to leave you with. I was in the Navy for 8 years, flying jets off of aircraft carriers. So I know that the Navy is an organization that runs on planning, training, and leadership, especially leadership. Similarly, implementing corporate programs that involve significant change requires the same 3 elements. But planning and training don't happen without leadership. This is a time that calls for leaders to determine the right workforce strategy and then to operationalize it. So be thoughtful in your planning, train your people, but most importantly, be the leader who seizes this opportunity for a new and more advantageous workforce strategy. So that is our webinar for today. It looks like we've got 13 minutes for some Q&A. And what I'm going to do is first put our names up on the screen so that if anyone has follow-up questions, a comment that they would like to ask that they think of later, please reach out and contact us. Or, as I mentioned, the Cresa advisor who invited you to the webinar. So let me stop sharing and we'll move on to the Q&A feature. Stand by. Okay, so first question is, who is typically included in the workshop that you offer? And I can take this one, that's an easy one. A lot of times people ask this because they are not certain of who would be the right team to form. And what we always recommend is this needs to be a multidisciplinary, multi-department engagement where you're pulling information, as we mentioned, from many departments, but especially human resources. I would highly recommend be involved. Chief of Human Resources, CIO or the CTO, whoever's the top information technology person, or you could choose between those two if you have both of those roles. I think that someone from operations would be very important. And then it's sort of your choice around which other departments do you want to include. But typically we'll have anywhere from 5 to 6, sometimes up to 9 people that walk through our workshop and blueprint plan. Again, it's so that we can gather information from multiple departments. Second question, will you be sending a copy of the presentation? Yes, we will. We'll send out a copy of the presentation afterwards to everyone who attended, and also a recording of the presentation. So this next question I think is a good one for Paul. What are some gotchas, some things that we may not be thinking of, and what can we do to avoid them? And I assume here they're talking about sort of either unintended consequences or outcomes that good planning could help them avoid. So in your experience, Paul, what have you seen that are some gotchas? You're on mute.
First one of the day.
The one thing that you just said, which is the most important, is being proactively prepared. So some of the gotchas you can really plan for in advance. And I think you covered some of those, like making sure that you update employment contracts, and there's some potential payroll issues that you may want to consider. If you have people that are working in locations that are different from their standard headquarters location, for example, you may not be set up for payroll in those locations. You may not have benefits in those locations. You may not be operationalized in some of those different locations in order to actually have someone be able to work there. So some of the gotchas are the basic things that most HR departments do, but may not be thinking about because it's not on the forefront. It's not obvious. And it's those things that when you really think about it, that really need to be involved in your planning and strategy.
Got it. Perfect. Steve, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think, one of the gotchas is, failing to plan, effectively does have downstream effects, but also plan your communications and really make sure that it's consistent and bi-directional, that you're getting good feedback. And that's a big gotcha, is everybody kind of thinks it's a top down, but you've got to make sure that you've got the right team members involved and you're getting that good upward feedback. Yeah,
that's good. Well, when you said that, it made me think of the famous John Wooden quote, failing to plan is planning to fail. Yep. And that's a truism, and that applies here. Steve, what are some examples of tools that help measure time, productivity, and engagement of hybrid employees?
Great question. Today, when you think about how much information it is and data is available, and that can be from your human resources systems, from your CRM systems, from your ERP systems. But let's first kind of pull back a layer and look at, all right, what are our goals and what do we want to measure? And then we can go and assess, how do we capture and compile that information and then turn it into a visualization of that information? So when you think about it, there are tools like Tableau and Microsoft have some very good, easy to use tools that go out and capture and compile. But it's the process of gathering the human resources, CRM, ERP, and KPI information to bring it into one central repository, massage it, and display it. But it all comes back to, what do we want to measure and what do we want to have as a business goal or objective? So to answer that question is time and productivity. We know that we can measure because the systems are already capturing it. So you're going to have KPIs and goals. And it starts just with that. What do we want to accomplish? And then how do we measure it? So with time and productivity, those come in through your HRIS systems, your ERP systems, and your CRM systems, and they're actually outputs based on productivity and the measurement of those things. So we're not measuring how many times did you take phone calls today. It's what were the outcomes of those phone calls, and we're getting that from your CRM. So keep it simple, but keep it measurable, manageable, and visible.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of questions around this because some of it seems so nebulous about what you measure. Sometimes it's hard to measure some of these things. But I know there's a whole school of thought that you are deep into around performance management.
So and you bring up the tool, and that is the performance management arena, but make it something that is meaningful and impactful to the business, that it is a measurable goal, because we want to be able to measure those things that have outcome-driven impacts, that are looking at this. And it's not micromanaging. It's really, what are the results of the work during the day?
Yeah.
Individual and collaborative. So we look at team and system as well.
Gotcha. Okay, it looks like we've got one more. And Paul, I think this is going for you. How do we maintain a positive culture between some employees working at home while others are in the office?
So there's a couple of things that you need to think about in that type of a situation. You want to make sure, as Steve mentioned before, that the communication is bi-directional, that you're listening to the feedback from employees as a leader. And as an employee, you feel comfortable sharing that information. And as you're looking at your strategy, you want to make sure that you're considering that you're bringing the employees along for the journey, and you're aligning your strategy with your overall, either your current culture or the culture that you're trying to aspire to as you're evolving from potentially an all in the office type of an employer to a hybrid or fully remote employer, as you're competing for talent, as you're working to hire and retain. And all of those components are really part of that. And another piece is around training, and I talked about this before, around training for employees and managers to make sure that both parties are engaged and really part of the overall culture and process as you're looking at this.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's the communication. It's really just sort of leadership 101, right? Good communication, consistent communication, really thinking about the quality of your communication is going to improve morale and help maintain a culture.
Right, and that communication plan that you talked about before is imperative for that.
Right. Okay, good. Well, I'll give it a second here, but those are the questions that have come in. If there's any others, here's your big chance to offer a question. So in any event, thank you for joining us today. We will send out a copy of the webinar and a recording, and we do have another one coming up in 2 weeks. So please reach out to your Cresa advisor to get more information about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.